Boker Tov. Today's daf yomi is Bava Basra 171. Today's daf yomi is dedicated for a shmira for the Chayalim, a tzolot for the Shuyim, and a Yeshua for Am Yisrael. This Eis Tzara. We're going to start today's daf yomi on the bottom of Kuf Ayin Amud Beis 170 at the bottom of 170b. The Gemara had said in the Mishnah on yesterday's daf that if a person pays, there's a note, let's say Reuven has a note against Shimon for $100, Shimon pays off 50 of the dollars. So now what does Reuven do? So one opinion in the Mishnah, opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, is that Rabbi Yossi has to write in that Rabbi Yehuda gets a new contract. You rip up the old one and you write a new one. Problem with that is the first contract created a lien from an earlier date. So therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the assumption is you just write the earlier date in the new contract, which isn't 100% MS because the earlier contract was written at an earlier date, and you can't just write in the earlier date, but you're allowed to. Rabbi Yehuda says the witnesses just write in the earlier date because everybody knows that's when the initial loan happened. Whereas Rabbi Yossi says, no, you write a receipt for the borrower. The borrower holds a receipt against the lender. So if the lender tries to use the initial contract again, he'll be facing the borrower will pull out the receipt. But the problem with that is that means the borrower has to hold on to this receipt because if he loses the receipt, now the lender can make a claim for money that he was already paid back. So comes along Rav, and Rav says, no, the witnesses can't write a new contract, but a Beis Din can write a new contract. The Gemara says then, well, if Rav had heard that there was a brisa that says that the witnesses can do it, would he have still said his position? And the Gemara says yes, he heard it and he didn't change his mind that the Beis Din has to do it. Rav can argue with the Tana. And what's the price? So the Gemara says on the bottom of 170b, 3 lines from the bottom, the Tanya Eidim Mekarenes Ashtar. This supports Rabbi Yehuda's position. Witnesses can tear up the document because of Ashtar Achar Mitzman Rishon. They write a new document from the initial date. Would he have, if he had heard this, have a Hadarbe, Amrway, Shmiole Blo Hadarbe. So the Gemara says that Rav Huna says, no, Rav heard this and he still didn't change his mind. He said, you can't just have witnesses tear up the document and then write a new document with the old date in it. Bishlam Beidin on the top of 171. Makes sense that a court can do it. Ali Malav Kuye Mimona. A court is strong enough to basically write an earlier date in, even though it's not 100% accurate, because the court can use their powers of Hefker, Beis Din Hefker. They could take over money and assign it however they want. So if they know something is the right way to do it, even though it's not 100% MS, they could do that. And what gives the right witnesses? They did their initial testimony. They can't do another testimony about that date when that's not what happened. They don't have the right to do that. It's not 100% accurate. Mara says, why not? We allow witnesses to write a deed that this is the person owns this property or was sold even 10 times if the document was lost. Mara says, yeah, when can you do that? Rabbi Yossi says, Bishtar Matana. Where do you allow the witnesses to do it? If it was a gift document, if Reuven gifted it to Shimon, then he's not putting any guarantees into that document. So there you allow the witnesses to write it because nobody else is going to be affected by it. But if there's a guarantee in it and the property gets repossessed from Shimon after Reuven had sold it to him, then Shimon could go to the subsequent purchasers of Reuven's property and make a claim against them. And so therefore, by a gift document, it's allowed because there's no guarantees. Or Rabbah says, Bishtar Shem B'Achreis, or any document that doesn't have guarantees in it, that's when the witnesses are allowed to. But if there's guarantees in the document, then it has to be done by a court, not by a witness. That's what Rav would say. So the Gemara says, no, but now let's cite that full brisa that if Rav had heard, that Rav heard and he still didn't change his mind. My brisa, the Tanya, Aresha, Yinoshimbo Elavzuz, Uparman Chamesh Me'adzuz. Let's say Reuven says to Shimon Yomi 1,000, and Shimon pays back $500. Eidim Mekarenes Ashtar, so then witnesses tear up the document that Reuven has because of Ashtar Achar Mizman Rishon. And they write him a new document saying that Shimon owes Reuven $500, and it goes back to the initial date of the $1,000 loan, even though now it's a later date. But since the lien was created from the $1,000 loan, so the new document should reflect that initial date. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, whereas Rabbi Yossi says, "Shtar zeh munach b'mkomo." Reuven says, Rabbi Yossi says you can't do that. No, you leave this $1,000 note in its place. Shover. And instead, what you should just do is write for the borrower a receipt. And Rabbi Yossi says there are two reasons why we tell him to write a receipt. One, because this will encourage the borrower to pay back his note. Because as long as he has the receipt, he's going to be very nervous that the lender will be that he'll lose the receipt, and then the lender will make a claim against him. So he's going to rush to pay back his debt, and that way the note will be torn up. And also, achas kadesha Yaakov v'achas kadesha Yigba mizman rishon. Also, if we write a receipt and we don't tear up the first document, then the lender will be able to have a lien from the initial date and not from the later date where the new contract was torn up. Gemara says, "Well, Rabbi Yehuda nami mizman rishon kamar." Didn't Rabbi Yehuda also say that the later document will reflect the earlier date? Gemara says, "Yeah, well, Rabbi Yossi will say halchi kamar way." Rabbi Yehuda. That's actually Rabbi Yossi saying to Rabbi Yehuda. Imizman rishon kamras. If in your new document that you tear up, you're putting in the initial date, poligno lach pachada. And I'm only arguing with you in one circumstance, i.e., I say that the borrower should still have a receipt so that he can, so that I'll be pressured into paying back his note, his debt. And imizman sheni cameras, and if the date in the second document is a later date, I'll say there's two reasons why a receipt. One is you should have a receipt to force the borrower to pay back out of pressure, and number two, because why should the lender lose the earlier lien? So that's what Rabbi Yossi says. Tan Rabbanan shtar shezmano kosov b'Shabbos o b'Asar b'Tishrei shtar me'uchar hu v'kosher. That's the position of Rabbi Yehuda, whereas Rabbi Yossi disqualifies. So what are we talking about here? Let's say you have a date in a contract, and it's not the Jewish date that's put in, but it's the non-Jewish date, the secular date, the calendar date. And then when you sit down and look at this date, you see that it's impossible that these two Rosh Yeshiva would have wrote down this date because it's a Yom Kippur loan or it's a Shabbos loan. So therefore, it's impossibility. So therefore, we have to say, oh, the document itself proves that this was not the date of the actual loan. And so therefore, it must be that the date was that the date which the loan took place, which was put in there to create a lien on the borrower's properties, was basically obviously a post-dated document. And so therefore the document proves from itself that it was a post-dated document. And that's where Rabbi Yehuda says it's kosher, and Rabbi Yossi says it's disqualified. So even in this case, and as the Gemara will explain, Rabbi Yehuda, first the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda says to Rabbi Yossi, wasn't there an incident before you in Tzipori V'Sharta? And you said that this post-dated document was kosher. Amar lo. So Rabbi Yossi says, no, Kishel Sharti, but Zeach Sharti. I only said that a post-dated document is okay where you could prove from the document itself that it was post-dated. But if you can't prove from the document itself that it's post-dated, I wouldn't say it's kosher. Gemara says, well, Rabbi Yehuda, Nami Bazekam. Rabbi Yehuda says, this type of document is kosher. So what's going on here? So the Gemara explains, let's explain the dispute between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. So says Rabbi Pedas, both Rabbi Yehuda, who says post-dated documents are kosher, and Rabbi Yossi, who says they're disqualified, everybody would admit, everybody would admit that if you examine the document, and it's clear that the document creates a lien on a day which obviously the loan would not have happened because it was Shabbos or Yom Kippur, everybody would agree that it's an obvious post-dated document, and therefore it's kosher. And we'll see what could be the problems with a post-dated document in a few moments. We're on top of 171b. They're only arguing about a regular document that's post-dated, but it's not 100% clear from the text The text doesn't prove it from the text of the document itself. It doesn't prove that it's post-dated. The Rabbi Yehuda Tamei, Rabbi Yehuda's of this position, the Amar Ein Kosvin Shova. Rabbi Yehuda generally says we don't write a receipt, because if you write a receipt, we don't write a receipt because if you write a receipt, fraud can happen. You're enabling fraud, as we'll see why. Whereas Rabbi Yossi's of the position, Rabbi Yossi who disqualifies this document, he's of the position in our Mishnah that you write a receipt. And so since you're writing receipts for documents, it's possible that once you write a receipt, a terrible fraud will happen. Why? Because what will happen is that look at the Rashbam says, how will this korba happen? Because Rabbi Yehuda's on the position. He says the post-date document is kosher because he says you don't write a receipt. And so therefore there's no concern whether it's post-dated when it was. He's not going to pay it until he takes the document and tears it up. And so since the document is torn up, we don't have to be concerned about anything. Whereas Rabbi Yossi, who disqualifies the post-dated document, he follows the position that you write a receipt. And so therefore, let's say you paid a portion of the loan, or even if you paid the whole loan and the lender says, I lost my document, well, now you write a receipt for the borrower. And so now what's going to happen, and so therefore, let's say it's a post-dated document and the guy has a receipt and now he pulls out the post-dated document and says, look, this happened, this was a subsequent loan. Well, now you have a problem. The borrower is being defrauded. So that's the concern. So therefore, you can't do post-dated documents according to Rabbi Yossi. Amar Avuna B'rei Rabbi Yeshua, Afilu Man Omer Kotzvin Shovar, even according to one who says you write a receipt, i.e. Rabbi Yossi, Hani Milia Palgo, that's only for half of the loan, but if it's the entire loan, you don't write a receipt. Now, what are we talking about here? We're talking about here where the borrower comes and says, I want to pay you back. You say I owe you 1,000. Okay, I have the $1,000. Give me back my document. Give me back the note. And the lender says, I lost the note. So now what can you do? If you write a receipt, then the lender won't be able to pull it out again. But now the borrower is stuck having to guard the receipt. And that's a huge problem because he could lose it. You try keeping track of all your records. So therefore, the Gemara says that Rav Yeshua says that when do we say you have to do a receipt for the borrower? That's where only half the loan was paid back. But if the whole thing was paid back, then you don't have to give it. Then the borrower is not required to watch the receipt. No, it's not the case, says the Gemara, that even if he pays back the entire loan, if you don't tear up the document, the borrower still has to be responsible to hold the receipt. The other Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef have a masik beisuzi Rabbi Abba, like Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef was saying that Rabbi Abba owes him money. Also coming to Rav Chanina Bar Papi. He came to Rav Chanina Bar Papi. Amroi Havli Zuzai. He says, "Give me my money." Amroi Havli Shtarai. So Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef said to Rabbi Abba, give me my money. So Rabbi Abba says, give me my document, and then she calls the Zeich, and then you'll take your money back. So Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef said, I can't. Shtarach irkasli. I lost your note. So he says to Rabbi Abba, I'll write you a receipt. Amraleya. So he says, I'll write you a receipt. So Rabbi Abba said, he says, no, I don't have to watch the receipt. They say you don't write a receipt. Where I'm willing to pay back everything. Why should I be responsible to hold on to this receipt? So they basically came before. Excuse me. Hold on. So they came before Rav Chanina Bar Papi, and so Rav Chanina Bar Papi said, look, Rav and Shmuel are the greatest, of course, we know this. So they said, Amar Man Yayev one may offer to Rav and Shmuel, Raminan by Nayan. He says, if we can only just take a little bit of the earth of Rav and Shmuel and stick it in our eyes, because we love them so much. I mean, these are the greatest tzaddikim. But Nevertheless, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shlokish, Amri Travayo, Kosvin Shover, but the halacha is you're the borrower. We write you a receipt under these circumstances. V'chein kiyasa Rav and Amar Rabbi Eli, Kosvin Shover. They say the halacha is the borrower is responsible to guard the receipt. And mistaber the Kosvin Shover. And it's logical that we should say that we write the receipt for the borrower. Even if you want to say we don't write a receipt under these circumstances, let's say it isn't really fair that if the lender loses his note, the borrower can just spend the money and not worry about having to pay you back. So it's obviously the case that we're going to write a receipt. It's logical. So so you say we write a receipt for the borrower, but now if the borrower loses the receipt, the lender can pull out the initial note and enjoy and make the money. That's not fair. So I'm really Rava in Indeed, that's the case. The borrower is the servant to the lender. So that is the case indeed. That is indeed the case indeed. That the borrower is the one who's responsible for the receipt. So the Gemara now says, hold on. Okay, so now the Gemara says, but there's a Mishnah in Shavuos which talks about these post-dated documents and these, or also earlier dated documents. Tanan Hasam Shtarechov Hamukdamin. If you have a document that writes an earlier date on it, that's going to be disqualified. That's psulim. Well, that's clearly very ripe for fraud. Let's say you say, I borrowed this money from you on January 1st. That means, even though today is February 1st, that means everything that I sold the borrower from January to February, there's automatically a lien on those properties. And the lender can now go and claim it from the people who bought it. And that's fraud because they bought it before the lien. But the post-dated documents are kosher. When do we say post-dated documents are kosher? If it's a loan document, because all it does is create the lien at an earlier time at a later time. That's no problem. But deeds of sale, says Rav Hamnuna, if it's a deed of sale, even if it's a post-dated document, it's going to be disqualified. My timer. For what reason? Zimnin the mezabele ara benisan. Because sometimes the person will be basically, sometimes the person will sell his property in Nissan. He's saying, I'm selling to a Nissan, but because of Leiba Tishrei, and he's going to write that it's being sold actually in Tishrei. So it's a post-dated document. Mr. Amile Zuze Beini Bain. So he says, I'm selling you the property in Nissan, but I'm selling you the property in Nissan, but really I'm going to put on the document that it's sold in Tishrei. And then in between Nissan and Tishrei, he's going to buy it back. And he'll go back and buy it. And when he's going to ask for the note back, the deed of sale, he'll say, I lost it. And Kimati Tishrei Mapikle. And then when all of a sudden Tishrei comes along, the purchaser is going to say, look, the purchaser will take out the document. There's a bond to me now. He says, I went and bought it back from you. And so therefore, basically, this proves that you sold me this land in Tishrei. And even and you sold it to me after you bought it from me between Nisan and Tishrei. And so since really the property is not that, it's really the property belongs to the seller who reacquired it. So therefore, this is fraud. So the Gemara says, well, don't we have the same thing with any loan? Why are those allowed to be post-dated? Zimnin deziv b'nisan. Sometimes you borrow in Nisan, but you'll say that you borrowed the money actually in Tishrei. Umisramile zuze beni beni, and he'll discover money in between. Uparile, and he'll pay off the debt. And when he pays off the debt, Amrle Havli and Amrle Irkasli, he says, I lost the note because of Tabra, and so therefore they'll write a receipt for the initial borrower, and Kimata Zamne, and then will come the time for, let's say, Tishrei, Mapiklev, Amrle Hashudi after me. He said, oh, the lender will take out the money and say, you borrowed it from me now, even though he had already paid it back. So he says, no. Rav Nuna says, we're not worried about that because Savar ain't Kos and Shover. He says, I hold like Rabbi Yehuda, we don't write a receipt. No, Amrle Rav Yirmiyah, Rav Kahana, Amrle Rav Yirmiyah, we dip to Rav Kahana, Va'inna, the Kos we start Mukhar. Because we in Tabra, but nowadays we write these post-date documents and we write the receipts. So how is that possible? Amrle Basra Damrle Rabbi Abba Safrei, because this is not applicable anymore. Because after Rabbi Abba says to his scribes, because Siftu Shtari Mukharo Katsu Achi. He says, Rabbi Abba said to his scribes, when you write a post-date document, write this. Shtar Denango Bizmane Katsvei El Renew because we knew. This is a post-dated document. You have to write that in. But we don't do that anymore. And he says, yeah, Basar. When you write these receipts, says if you know the actual date that was lost in the receipt, write it down. Meaning to say, write down the date so people will know what date it was, so they won't be able to use it improperly. But if you don't know the date, below, because who's stama, the kol emas denafik array. But if you don't know the actual date, write the receipt without a date, and you should just write the amount of money that was written in the note, so that whenever the borrower will take it out, basically the receipt will be ruined. Meaning to say, don't put so that he can't use the later date. So Amrei Ravino Ravashi, Va'amri Ravashi Rav Kahana, Va'ina the Lokav Dina Nachim. We don't do that. So what's your explanation? Amrei, listen. On top of Kufayim Bezam Menal, listen. Rabbanim Takuni Takine, Manda Avid Avid, Manda Avid Ihu de Avzin Anavsha. Listen, the rabbis made a takana. If you don't want to follow their takana, that's on you. But the rabbis made a takana, and the person who doesn't do it, he's costing himself. This is a lesson for life. The rabbis made a takana to help us. If you don't want to follow it, then the loss is all upon you.